If anyone listens to this conversation and, that it's really important that they know it's not them not being good enough horse people. It's perfectly sensible to not want to get a horse into a state where it's pulling away from you or rearing up or striking out or going into flight mode. We are doing something wrong if we are letting horses get into that situation.
I'm Karen Luke.
And I'm Mita Osborne.
Today we are extremely lucky to have Naomi Ainley here with us. Naomi is the curriculum manager at Northumberland College. She has a biomedical science degree and postgraduate qualifications in equine science. And she also has loads of practical experience working as a groom and managing yards. So welcome, Naomi. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hello, and good morning.
So I was wondering if you could share with us a little bit about your journey so far. You've clearly had such an interesting blend of both theoretical and educational and hands-on roles. Could you tell us a bit about your journey to get to where you are now?
Yeah, essentially I'm easily bored, and I think that's probably where it's all come from. So I started off a pretty classic route in the UK, in that I started off as like a volunteer helper at a local riding school, and came through the system that way, ended up working as a show jumping groom, went to an agricultural college, ended up running the yard there for 10 years, quite a big yard, and then really enjoyed that and sort of got loads of sort of practical experience, lots of working with different people. But then was aware that sort of life circumstances needed to change, and that I wanted to kind of upskill and maybe going into the lecturing side of things. But had a chat with someone at the time that was running an equine science degree, and the kind of feedback I got back that I was practical, I was too practical, and that it was quite difficult, this equine science degree. And I got in going, look, if I'm going to do it, I want to get a first. That was my my goal-driven head, and was basically told, oh, it's really tough, and yeah. So at that point I was like, oh, okay, fine, I'll go and do something else instead. So that's when I went and did the biomedical science degree, which I really enjoyed doing, and it kind of, I suppose, developed my interest in learning, but sort of ended up a slight detour via science labs, and then I ended up working as a lecturer again, and on the basis of that going to the eventually to study, because I just realised that there were elements now that were coming through on the equine side of things that I wasn't aware of, that I hadn't I kept hearing this stuff. I thought, I don't know anything about this, and actually perhaps I should actually go and do some deep learning in terms of my specialist subject. And that's where I ended up at the doing the MSc at Edinburgh University, and yeah, we started off with the equitation science module, and it was kind of like, yes, I suppose like a kid in a candy shop. You sort of go in, you're like, oh my god, there's all this stuff I knew nothing about, and you have this fantastic library and all these studies, and yeah, it was just brilliant. And that was kind of my sort of starting point for sort of I suppose it's where my career started, I feel, in terms of a bit of a reset.
Yeah, what an incredible journey. Like, I think Mita describes a period in her life where she got the keys to the library, don't you, Mita?
Absolutely. It's mind-blowing. I don't think there's any other word for it. Yeah. Naomi, I'm interested in that point when someone said you're too practical. And in the position you're in now, I'm sure you have lots of kids coming to you saying, I'm really interested in maybe, pursuing the academic side of things. You don't. What's your response to those kids? It's an interesting thing that someone would say.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know whether it was of that time, because it would have been early 90s. I personally think having that foot in both camps, if you like, the practical side and the academic side, is key. And I think, looking back on it, that's probably why we're in the situation we are now, in that we've gone down this academic route of all this knowledge, and we've gone down this practical route with all this practical ability, but it's almost like they're separate camps. And I've always viewed it as a little bit of a... I've actually viewed it as I always felt I wasn't practical enough. Because there were certain things that were done on the practical side of things that I didn't agree with or I didn't feel comfortable with, but that's how it was done, so I didn't feel I was good enough. And then obviously I wasn't purely academic and not mega intelligent, and that side of things was very new. So, in terms of how we sort of advise students going now is you've absolutely got to have that practical underpinning. You've got to be able to do this stuff. But I think if you're not aware of all the theory, and in particular the behaviour from where I am now, then you're kind of missing a huge element of that ability to actually do what we need to do, whether it's coaching or training or just caring for the horses.
Naomi, I have followed you on LinkedIn and Facebook and seeing all the work you're doing, and in particular the thing that's jumped out at me are the really interesting guests that you have had come visit. And I know a couple of times I've gone so far as looked up the flights to Newcastle because I thought I really have to go see that, hear that person. Is that something in your approach that you like to bring in outside people, guest lecturers? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I mean that all stemmed again from going back to Edinburgh University really, and the sort of initial module, that equitation science module particularly introduced me to learning theory, and sort of quite a few people that then would go on to really sort of shape my career and interest sort of going forwards. Initially that was Lisa Ashton, who is an equitation science international practitioner. So she was someone that could help me put learning theory into practice, which I'm still learning to do. But that was really interesting. So I've benefited from Lisa's knowledge and experience sort of for several years, and really probably would credit her with my ability to sort of move forwards on this path really. And then sort of off the back of that and just sort of growing interest in finding out more about the areas that I have a knowledge deficit in, met Christina Wilkins online. And obviously Christina's through Horses and People, through her sort of the magazine that she runs, and off the back of that obviously some interest in the 5 domains, and Christina released her course last year on using 5 domains as a welfare assessment model in performance horses. I did the course early on, was like, oh wow, and Lisa and I had been discussing coming up to do a CPD workshop day at the college, and just, I just let Christina know that that's what we were doing, and was that okay? And she was like, oh, actually I could come over. So it was mad. But yes, so in October Christina basically came over and introduced the 5 domains model as a means of welfare assessment, obviously sort of building on David Mellor's work, and it's kind of sort of jettisoned from there really.
What's the feedback been like from the students?
I think so some of our HE students joined us for the day, and they absolutely loved it, and they've gone away and they've had a little bit of a play, and they've also sort of fed back to Christina as well in terms of their sort of more practical use of the model. And Christina actually popped in again, actually not so long ago, to actually speak to some of our second year students that are based across the animal management students actually. So we had some equine students, some animal management, some wildlife conservation students, and just to discuss the 5 domains model with those in terms of welfare assessment and looking at the sort of rolling out and looking at other domestic species as well. So Yeah, they were really interested. They've sort of been on this. My level 6 students have been on this journey with us in terms of using learning theory and training horses with learning theory rather than the traditional method that we have in the UK. And so they just they kind of just roll with everything we do. They're brilliant. I come up with all these sort of mad schemes and they're like, yay, let's do it. And so they've really sort of, I think it's opened their eyes up, and I think they are much more aware and probably approach all their interactions with horses much more from that perspective of the horse being a horse, and from Tellus and from Unwelt, and that creates its own its own problems. And obviously we've had Karen in come on and to have a chat with our students and discuss those difficulties, really, because it's a challenge for them, really. And that's what sort of led me to my next sort of aim, really, was that it's all very well introducing these students at the start of their career to stuff that I wish I'd known at the start of my career. But it kind of means they go out and they view life and their interactions with horses very differently. And there's not always that kind of background knowledge yet in industry. So they're going out into industry and people are looking at them like, hang on a minute, that's a bit of a fluffy approach, if you like. That's it's not. It's very different to how we've sort of done things in the past. And because they're young, there is that slight difficulty in translation, in sort of, they're maybe not taken as seriously as perhaps, someone may listen to me a little bit, or be more likely to listen to me because I've got a few more wrinkles, whereas they're quite young, and it's kind of like, well, you haven't got that mileage, you haven't got that experience, so it's tough for them actually to go out, and that's why I wanted to just try and bring the local community sort of on the journey with us. And kind of cut out the purely academic route, really, and just bring everyone else on board.
That would be on the basis that a number of your students will be working within maybe a 50-mile radius, so they're in yards that are, you can have outreach with. So is that the way you're
just very, and to help the local, it's about. We have social licence to operate. It's huge at the moment. It's been huge for several years. And, I'm here because my career is based on horses. I'm here because I started at a riding school. And if we lose that, if we lose riding schools, if we lose leisure riders, if, the elite competition, rightly or wrongly, depending on your view at the moment, is kind of the pinnacle of the sport. That's what everyone looks up to, that's what everyone aims for. And if we kind of lose all that, we're equine industry is responsible for an awful lot of livelihoods, built on the back of the horse, essentially. And so we do need to change. There is that need to change. And, top-down approach, education approach, top-down approach doesn't work. I don't think the education approach, you can't educate at people, you've got to bring them on board on that journey and have those conversations. So the more people that you kind of, I suppose it's ripple effect, isn't it? The more people that you sort of introduce stuff to, it's not that information, sowing seeds, if you like, is not going to land with everyone, but a few people might go away and think about it, and then they might come back and think about it a little bit more, and then they might have conversations with other people, and it's that ripple effect. And it's about supporting the local community and trying to bring them on board and accelerate change in this area, I suppose.
Yeah, and I guess that's kind of what we're trying to do too with the podcast. Is it's like amplifying those voices and allowing people opportunities to engage with different ideas, because it is challenging, isn't it? If you are a rider or a horse owner looking for a different way of going, finding someone to help you along that journey can be quite tricky.
I think it is, and you do need support, because you do. you know, you've only got so much energy and so much motivation, and it is hard, you know, and you go out there and you kind of like bang your drum, and every so often you're just kind of like, I'm tired now, I need to stop and rest. And having that community that you can go back into and have those conversations, or this was really difficult, or that went wrong, and it's a little opportunity to have support, but also just kind of re-energize, if you like, refuel, and then sort of go back out there, so you don't actually lose that motivation to keep trying. And that's the other thing. This is why I wanted to be sort of community based, because actually having online is fantastic. It enables you to go out and find information and see practice, and probably help you make informed decisions about things. But I don't think you can beat being in a room with people that have similar interests and similar experiences, and forming those alliances, if you like, so that those sort of small, really, really strong sort of tight-knit groups that you can come back to and have conversations, you know, if things have gone wrong, or you're feeling a bit down because you're not making progress, or someone's throwing you a bit of a curveball, you know, you can go through and safe spaces, I suppose, isn't it, Carrie? You know, you can have those conversations and talk through issues, and hopefully just reassess and crack on again.
Yeah, most definitely. And I find it myself, even having these conversations on the podcast, you know, it's an opportunity to evaluate your thinking and bounce your ideas off someone else. And particularly, like you say, Naomi, if you're trying to do things differently, almost inevitably you're going to run into problems, aren't you? Something's not going to work, and just to have that little bit of community or support where you can say, hey, you know, I tried this but it didn't work that well, you know, have you had a go, have you tried something, you know, and you can, even if it's not just the practical things, it can also be exploring the ideas themselves, and in a supportive, like you say, in a safe
and I think
environment.
It's also being really honest, and I think this is possibly somewhere that we don't have from the more traditional approach, you know, that actually it's not the end of the world if you fail, if you get it wrong. And I suppose when you're trying something new, you know, you're probably more accepting that things aren't perhaps going to go right all the time, or that maybe that approach didn't work with that horse, or actually you've messed up that session just because your timing was wrong, or something, you know. But when it's new to yourself, and when it's new to those that you're working with, you know, it can be quite sort of dispiriting. You know, you do question yourself, going, have I got this right? With the training module we do with the students, as I say, we train from learning theory, and we're sort of attempting sort of, you know, training from a behavioural modification. And I don't always have the answers. You know, we try something with a horse, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, and we don't, you know, and so we go away and we scratch our head and go, okay, so, you know, but then we go back through that kind of, it's almost like trust the process, and we go back and go, okay, so what was different today from this week, or you know, and we start reviewing, and it's quite a good process to model with the students, actually, when things go wrong. You know, to show that's life, isn't it?
I think the thing is that in the traditional approaches, we trust the process too much, and there isn't enough of that reflection and evaluation. And did that actually work? We just, because we expect it to work, it worked to a degree, but maybe it didn't really. But because we've been doing it forever, we don't even question. Whereas when you're trying something new, you're always tweaking a little bit, and you're going to be more open to perceived failures, when in fact they're not. They're just part of the learning. And
maybe, you know, like really established coaches, you know, we talk about tools in the toolbox. Maybe they've got so many tools in the toolbox that they can kind of just switch across, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 approaches in a session, but don't necessarily explain what they're doing or explain why they're going through, you know, so that they actually might be doing the same thing. It's just that they're maybe not specifically aligned to learning thing, but they may be using practices that actually do work within learning theory. But I certainly didn't know why things did and didn't work before I came across learning theory. It explained an awful lot. I'm not the best rider in the world by any means, but I quite good at making horses calm. I'm quite good at getting a sort of forming a working relationship with a lot of different types of horses, and I never really knew why, and now I know it. You know, effectively, I've just got good timing. I'm consistent, you know, and I'm clear with what I do, and I can explain that now to students going forwards. Whereas I couldn't do that without that underlying knowledge of the learning theory. So, you know, it's that. I was working through learning theory again with some first year students yesterday because they struggle with the theory, you know, so we sort of go back and we dip in and out and we come back and try different approaches to help them sort of get their head around it, you know, and the one thing that really helps with them was actually, so we say, right, well, okay, what about this? Tell me about one of the horses that you've worked is where this has been the case or that's been the case, and that really allows them to then sort of dip into the underlying theory and test out whether what they're thinking is right and working is right. So, yeah, I do think, you know, that it's not a bad thing necessarily to come from a place where, you know, we are pushing the boundaries a little bit in terms of our knowledge, not knowledge full stop, but our knowledge of a subject. And, you know, and as long as we're honest about that and accepting of the fact that, you know, we're not always going to get it right, then that's not a bad thing to model, really.
I read, and I suppose it is related, I read about your efforts to design a social stable setup.
Yes.
That's kind of pushing the boundaries a bit too. And how is that going down?
Slowly. We are, you know, we're a further education college, and obviously funding is when we get funding, it has to be split amongst sort of various departments. So it's never going to be as quick as I'd like it to be. But I've been really lucky, actually. The management team here are really supportive. They realise that what we're doing is quite. It's not new. There are social housing setups in the UK. It's not a new concept by any means, but the decision to actually bring, again, change our management as fast as we can and as we are physically able to manage horses in the way that's much more basically aligned to how they are designed to live. So we've got this. It's only a small area. We'll probably only be able to fit about 4 horses in, but we are moving that to, as I say, a social housing setup. We're looking at changing our paddock turnout as well, so it's a little bit more probably in line to the equicentral system. We've got Stuart coming over in about a month's time to advise us on that and see what we can and can't do. The support internally from the staff has been great. What's been really nice is how much support we've had on social media for the fact that we're trying, you know, and as I say, we're not perfect, we're not experts, but we realise that there's changes to be made. We're hopefully, well, we are going to be introducing social windows, if you like, into another yard we've got that's very much sort of concrete box stables that the horses can only sort of see each other if they look out through the door. So it's not as quick as I'd like. I'd like to be able to click my fingers and have it all sorted. I'm going to have to be patient. But, yeah, you know, and the nice thing is that we're getting the students involved in planning it all. That's we've got an exercise planned after our May bank holiday with the students. They're going to have an online webinar with someone in the morning, and then they're going to go out and measure up, and they're actually going to research and plan the space as well. So, yeah, it's nice to see that all happening.
I love that.
And the students getting involved.
That's applying your knowledge. That's fabulous. Yeah, I love that. That's something they can take with them out into the big bad world. Yeah. Yeah,
and to see the different, you know, to see it happening is brilliant for them.
Yeah. So just for someone who might not know what a social stable is, could you just describe the space a little bit, Naomi, and sort of I know the students are going to help you plan it, but what the vision might be?
We have, essentially, we've got a yard that was like a traditional stable yard. So it was like basically a barn with internal breeze blocks setting up, so there were individual stables, and essentially what we've done at the moment is we've just taken all the internal stabling out, so we've effectively got a big barn space. We've got, well, it's not huge, but we've got a similar space outside of the barn. It's not grass, it is a concrete area at the moment, but we've essentially got an inside and an outside area. And And the idea is that space we will set up sort of different feeding stations, we'll set up some social drinking stations, hopefully different surfaces, hopefully little sand source. They've got sort of separate sleeping areas. And the idea is that we will have 4 of our college horses that are a bonded group will live there. So when they're not out on grass, we do as much as possible keep them out on grass. They live out, weather permitting, although obviously, like everyone in the UK, we've been battling with the bog of this winter because it's been horrific. But so the plan is that weather permitting, they will live out, and when they come in during the day, they will go into this social housing area, or if they do have to come in because the weather's really bad or whatever, again, that group will go into the social housing area. So we will still have elements of traditional stabling elsewhere, but our plan is that we introduce that area so the students can see the difference in how the horse is kept. They can see that they can see their horizon more, that they can see each other more, that they've got the opportunity to feed and drink socially if they want to. We can then introduce like little enrichment stations and browsing, and so we've got that facility really to just really shake it up and show the students, we can't have them living out in fields all the time, living how they really want to be, because that's just, we can't do that at the moment. But we are doing our best to, I suppose, meet them halfway, perhaps.
Yeah, and it sounds like, such a, good compromise, because you've got to look after the land, and when things are really boggy, it's really challenging.
Yeah, and it's, and we haven't got a lot of land, so it does get pretty horrible. And the horses appear to want to come in. I'm sure it's because they come in because they want to be fed. But it's always difficult to understand really their underlying motivations about what they want to do at any given time. But it certainly helps. I think it will help. And then in the breeze block yard, obviously they will have social windows. So obviously we'll have to be a bit careful about who lives next door to who, so that we don't have any, that we want the horses to feel safe in their areas. And obviously if they're next to someone that they don't like, then that can cause problems. So we tend to turn them all out in bonded pairs anyway, the ones that don't live within the college herd. So we will stable them next door to one another. Obviously they can see each other, they will be able to interact with each other, and hopefully that will help a little bit as well.
One of the things I love about your approach, Naomi, is that you have this really eclectic approach where you're prepared to entertain old traditional approaches where appropriate and try new ones and things like that. So I'm really curious, of all of the new things that you've tried to date, what's the one thing you think has made the most difference to the horses at the school?
I think the main difference, which has had kind of, I wouldn't say universal buy-in from the students, but has had pretty successful buy-in from the students, is just that switch to see, to make them realise that traditionally we are sold that the horse is our partner. And the horse wants to do what we want to do, or it enjoys that interaction. And it's a really tough pill to swallow, to actually realise that given the opportunity, they'd be out with their mates and wouldn't give us a second thought. And I've managed that switch softly in some cases, and I've just gone all out other times and just gone, this is how it is, and just walk people through it in about 10 minutes. And it's really fascinating to see the range of emotions that brings. And we lose some people up. This is not students, but I'm thinking of the community. We've had some people physically, have gone away because they don't want to hear that, or they're not ready to hear that yet. But our students are brilliant. They get it straight away. And we now are going to build that conversation into the induction week when the students start, and a little bit of basic behaviour so that they understand the behaviours when the horse perhaps isn't having such a nice time, perhaps would like to be left alone, or, you know, that gives them the tools to immediately have that feedback from the horse and the choice then to do something about it. Now, not all of them are going to choose to do something about it, and that I can't change yet, but I can give them the tools to be able to be in a position where they can make that decision. And I think that's probably internally within the college and externally is probably the biggest, possibly the biggest motivator of change, I think.
That's so interesting. So it's really the change in how people see the interaction.
Yeah.
As opposed to anything necessarily changing the interaction itself.
Yeah, I think if you can stomach the fact that we use horses, and I think if you can be comfortable with that concept, then it really allows you to move forward in a completely different mindset. You can love them and still use them, but we're not a partnership. It's not the horse, it doesn't have a say in what we do. The horses wouldn't choose to work in the school if they had the opportunity, I should imagine. And I think it's accepting that. And once you accept that, it does kind of just shakes your foundations a little bit. A lot of people find it very uncomfortable. But yeah, that mindset shift is I think, key.
Was there something that took you a long time to sort of go through that process yourself before you were prepared to give something a try? And, perhaps
I think this whole striking out into the community, really, and just having, personally, from my point of view, it's a confidence thing. It's very easy when you're surrounded by people that are experts in their field to kind of defer everything to them. Because you're like, oh, so-and-so always knows more about behaviour, or so-and-so knows more about learning theory, or so-and-so knows more about welfare. There's always people that are so much more knowledgeable than you. And I always kind of feel that they are the people I want to bring in to talk to either the community or the students. And that in itself is a barrier, because that's never going to happen. It's just physically, it can't happen. People don't have time, resources. And so I think that just having the guts to kind of say, actually, I do know enough now, and I am going to give it a go, I think was probably for me the biggest turning point. I did a talk last year where we came off the back of a British Horse Society talk where I'd worked with Patrick Print and just introduced social licence, because it was coming a little bit more mainstream last year. It was after the pentathlon and people were sort of a little bit more curious. So I'd sort of done that, and on the basis of that, just looked at the future of the equestrian sector. And, who am I to come in and make these predictions? And yeah, there was a lot of self-doubt in there, and I put a lot of time and effort into that presentation. And it went, I think it went sort of 50-50. I think some people were like, oh yeah, some people were like, no. But what was really nice was the predictions I came out of were actually echoed by a blog piece that Renata Larsson did about 8 or 9 months later. So it was like, oh, I am maybe onto something then. But yeah, so I think that just having the confidence really to crack on.
Yeah, I think I'm so glad you shared that, Naomi, because I feel like there would be so many horse owners out there who, probably feel that lack of confidence. And I kind of feel like I was like that for at one point of time. And I think it's great that people can hear that even someone like you who's got all of this experience, you've got all of this knowledge sitting behind you, and you're leading, students learning equine science, and yet you still, at times have doubts. So I think but despite the doubts, you crack on and you have a go. And I think that is just such a wonderful thing for people to hear, because sometimes it can feel a bit lonely and you've got those doubts, and maybe people are sort of saying, "Oh, I don't know if this is what you're doing is a very good idea," and things. So I think so. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think that's just such a wonderful thing for people to hear.
Well, yeah, go out and get it, because it was. I have to admit, it was a real turning point for me. I'd always been, going back to sort of personal psychology, one of the people that always needs to have a certificate in something and then still didn't feel like they were knowing enough. And it's, at some point you've just got to give it a go. And yeah, so and it's kind, and then I now kind of think, what could go wrong?
The good news is we have a magic genie in this virtual studio, and she allows you to do anything you want to do, and these doubts and these, lack of they don't come into it. You can just do it. What would that one thing be?
Oh, I'd go out for lots of funding so I could make even more changes in the college, I think.
Well, she can give you the funding too, so that isn't an issue. So no constraints. What would that thing be?
I just go out and do more of the same, really. I've not got, I like being in this intersection. I like connecting people. I like doing what I'm doing, and I just think being able to affect that a little bit more. And just spending the time to be able to figure out how we really do reach those people that we're not reaching at the moment, I think. We have this ripple effect, but it's slow and steady. The time to go and do that, I think, would be nice.
I suppose, and then in a general sense, we're all talking, I know social licence is part of it, but the future of horse sport, just, in its generality, the sustainability of horse sport, where do you see that going in the next 5, 10, 15 years?
That's interesting, isn't it? I do think we will see more bitless. I think we will see the rise of more focus around positive reinforcement. I think that's a given. I think elite level, that's a tough one, isn't it? Because there's also issues around not just welfare, but sustainability. I think we can do elite level competition. I think we can do it different. I think we're already seeing people starting to do that. We're seeing horses compete barefoot. We're seeing horses compete bitless. We're seeing horses compete bridleless now. Perhaps at the moment there isn't, I don't think, the appreciation of how much training goes on with this, with both bitless and bridleless behind the scenes. It's not just a straight switch. But that's not insurmountable. But I think I personally have issues about the amount of travel these horses do. I don't think it's sustainable now to travel horses internationally to compete. It's not good for the planet. It's not good for the horses. We've got the thoroughbred industry again. The same with the breeding with those. The sires going across and covering in the UK and then going to Australia. That when we've got artificial insemination, is that really necessary? Better for the horses if they stay put, I think. I don't know. I honestly don't think we'll lose horse sports. I genuinely think we can do better, and I genuinely think we can find a way so that horses have a better time. Will they necessarily love what they do? Debatable. Can we do it where they have a better time of it? Yes, I think absolutely. But yes, I am I worried it's going to stop? No, but I think there's going to have to be a pretty major change, and it's not just at elite level as well. I think that's got to come down to grassroots level as well, riding schools, everything. And I would like to see a change in a focus on the relationship with the horse rather than just getting on and riding it. And I think given how many we sell the mental health benefits of riding, don't we? And that comes from the relationship. So we're onto a winner there for starters.
And isn't relationship a better word than partnership?
Do we have a relationship with them? I suppose it doesn't have to be an equal relationship, does it? I suppose. Mm-hmm. Who was it? was it Julie Fidler said guardians? We're horse guardians.
One of the things I don't know whether we'll include this or not, but in terms of a relationship, sometimes I think of it a little bit like a parent and child. So it's not equal, but it can still be good. It can be positive, and the horse can get benefits from it.
I don't know.
I don't know what other people think about that idea.
That's actually, because you're still then put in a situation where you're responsible for that child's welfare, for that child's happiness and care. So that's quite a nice, but they don't necessarily always know what's best for themselves. So that would then also justify things like, elements of care that do involve some negative experiences, like, for example, if you have to go and worm your horse or vaccinate your horse. None of us enjoy that, but we appreciate the greater good. So I think that's a nice analogy, actually. I like that.
I think going back to your point about elite riders, elite competition, and then I suppose leisure riders, I think the most fertile ground for change is probably at the leisure rider, that intermediate level. I think the elite level riders are, and owners in general are, they're very satisfied with where they're at, and they're not going to want to change much at all. But I think your leisure, equestrian people who are genuinely interested and probably are a little bit more flexible, I think that's where you're potentially going to have effect. And their numbers are greater.
Yeah,
so
in
theory, you should have a impact.
Yeah, and I think the other thing with leisure riders as well, and I can say this from coming from personal experience, I'm not the bravest rider in the world. I'm not a risk taker. And I don't want to get hurt. I don't want the horses I ride to get hurt. And, we know that when we keep horses in a way that's more akin to the way they should be kept, and we read up on behaviour better, we actually set ourselves up in a position where, A, we're safer, and the horse is safer, and we're all more likely to have a better time of it. And I think that's another... I know, Karen, obviously you're really interested in the safety side of things. I think that's huge.
Yeah, that's definitely like the research that I did. Certainly we showed that there was a relationship between, a happier horse, because we measured welfare in terms of the 5 domains, which you've touched on before, and those horses, when we used the 5 domains to measure their welfare, those with better welfare, their riders reported fewer accidents. But the thing that I really loved about the research was also that as the scores for the horses went up, people reported more enjoyment. So it's like win-win. So not only for the horse, but also for the owners and the riders.
And it's I think that knowledge of behaviour, and also the knowledge of how the horse needs to be, is We because we love our horses, we're in it for, like you said, we talked about relationship. We're in that with a relationship with our horses. We want our horses to like us, because that kind of validates how good an owner we are, how good a horse person or a trainer or a rider or a coach we are. That's our horse feedback to us, but we don't necessarily get it right. I had to laugh. I've retired my horse recently, Oreo, and I'd had him for about 18 months. And he was incredibly vocal, really vocal horse. And so I'd walk on the yard and he'd shout for me and, oh, yeah, God, I must be an amazing horse owner. He loves me, look. And I had to retire him. And I turned him away. And I knew he'd be fine because he loved living out. He loved company. So he's retired now. And I don't get a second look now. And I don't get a whinny. The only time I get any response out of him is when there's a little bit too little grass in the field and he's hungry, and actually he'd rather like to be moved to another field, so he'll come to the gate with me and shout at me. That's the only time when he's hungry. And so when I look back on it now, he wasn't shouting for me. He was shouting for his next bit of a food arrival, or more probably to actually be turned out because he wanted to be out. So that crushed me. With my little, doesn't love me. It was just shouting at me really loudly, I don't want to be here, I want to be out there. and I didn't twig. You know, and that is...
But isn't that back? Yeah.
Sorry.
It's back to language. No. It's just back to language. If you're in a foreign country, you don't speak the language, and someone comes up to you gesticulating and saying, you have no idea, but you kind of guess what it might be, and you can be so wrong. And it's just the same thing. You just don't understand their language.
Yeah, but it's that's kind of, you know, in my head, that's how I validate it. I was like, oh my God, he loves me. Look at this. He's chatting to me all the time. He's, completely missed the point.
Yeah, but now you're so much better at interpreting the language, and I guess if you...
I'm much more accepting that they only like me because of what they can get from me. That I'm you know, there are deficits in their care, and they see me as someone that can perhaps rectify some of that short term. I'm quite, you know, that's where we are.
I just want to pick up on something you said there about not being a risk taker, you know, not maybe advancing in your writing career because maybe you weren't a risk taker, and yet you've taken all sorts of risks in your academic career in providing these opportunities for the students. So I think that's really interesting. Yeah,
years and years ago, I was helping a friend when I was a teenager. I was holding a friend who was clipping a horse, and we twitched it because it was a bit ticklish. I don't know. Anyway, he had one of the classic explosions out of the twitch that we've all seen, slammed me up against the wall, and we both slid down the wall like one of those cartoon videos, and it frightened me. And I just thought, these twitches don't work. You know, we've got a horse here that's I am never going to be able to physically control. I'm never going to be able to physically make it do something. It's too big, you know. And I've gone down the route, like I'm sure most of you have, or unless you've been enlightened really early, of, you know, like taking brooms to horses to get them in trailers, and lunge whips to horses to get them in trailers, and it was never nice, and it was always dangerous. And I'm like, why would you do this? You know, there has to be a better way of doing this. But because everyone I respected at the time did it that way, I just assumed it was me, and that there was a deficit in me, that I wasn't a good enough horse person. And that's the same with riding, you know, make it jump higher, you know, all that way. So I've never been particularly interested in competitive riding, probably because I've come from that viewpoint, really. But it made me sort of really, that kind of fear was probably my, it makes it like I was terrified of everything. I wasn't terrified of everything, but that, you know, that intent not to be in that situation where those horses got so stressed that they were dangerous, that, you know, I think was probably why when I learnt about learning theory, that kind of really jumped out at me as, this is the way forwards, this is what I'm missing, this is where we're going wrong. I would say it wasn't so much fear, it was self-awareness. You could see that there was more to this than just that gut, you know, terror. It was actually, there's something else going on here. So look where it's led you. I mean, I think it was actually a force for good. But I mean, if anyone listens to this conversation, and, you know, that it's really important that they know it's not them not being good enough horse people. It's perfectly sensible to not want to get a horse into a state where it's pulling away from you, or rearing up, or striking out, or going into flight mode. You know, we are doing something wrong if we are letting horses get into that situation. Now, I know that there are always going to be situations where we get that and it's unexpected, and that's different. But if we can see that escalating level of behaviour, and we are not readdressing our approach, we are taking the wrong approach. That is a wonderful way to wrap up this session now. I've gotten so much out of it. You've been very honest. I think listeners, I know I appreciate it. You've been very honest about your journey, and I think listeners will really, really take so much away from it. Thank you.
And I think too, if you're lucky enough to be near the north of England and you're someone listening who is looking for a alternative way, and, you know, an approach to horses where we're not getting them into a ridiculously heightened state in order to do the things that we either need to do or that we'd like to do, then please look up Naomi
Yes.
at Northumberland College.
We're putting on new stuff, so we've got some positive reinforcement clinics, and we do a few bitless clinics, and we've got Lucy Reese coming up with Bonnie Meelan sort of in June. So just if you want to help us keep striking out in the right direction, then do get in touch. We'd love to hear from you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Naomi. Like Meeta, I have learnt a lot, and I've really, really enjoyed our conversation today. So thank you so much.
It's been good fun. Thank you for the invite.
Hey everyone, it's Karen. Thanks for listening, and we really hope you loved the show today. You can support the show by liking and subscribing, and of course, if you write a review, that will help other people find the show. We are always looking for ways to make the show better, so if you have an idea for the show, have a question you would like us to answer, or there's someone you'd like us to interview, then please send us an email to team@changingrein.com.au. We would love to hear from you, and thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye.